Are you feeling a little stressed? Let's distress today. In fact, we're going to talk about all kinds of inks and about inking today. We're learning about archival inks, water-based dye inks, as well as distress inks. And in the process of learning all about those, we are going to make a scrapbook page. So don't stress out about it. Let's get started. The first ink we're going to play with today is Ranger's Distress ink. Now, you may have used this a number of different ways. This is a way that we can use the ink to make a really cool background paper for our page. I'm starting with a 4 by 12 inch piece of paper here, and before we're going to crinkle this paper into a ball, what we want to do is loosen the fibers of that paper. And as I just take it, now I've got it crinkled, and I'm going to open it up. And you can do this with any type of paper. Cardstock, manila tags work great, and then just crinkle it one more time. Add a little bit more beauty to our distressed paper. All right, so I'm flattening it out, and I have this laying on top of a nonstick craft sheet by Ranger. This product works great for whenever you're working with inks and it might get on your tabletop. Now I'm taking the lid off of my distress ink and just rubbing it right over the paper. It's picking up some of the paper's texture. It's picking up a lot of ink where the wrinkles have been added. So when you feel that you have this really the way you want it, we're going to bring in a spritzer bottle of water. Now with a traditional ink, the ink color would actually begin to break down when we're adding the water, but in this case, the ink wicks across the paper as you spritz it with water, so that's what the ink is designed to do. Now I'm going to slide underneath my nonstick craft sheet, which is also heat proof as well, and I'm going to bring in a craft iron. Now I have this iron set at the hottest setting with no steam. We already have plenty of water to work with here, and look what's happening to this paper. I'm getting rid of all the wrinkles that I've placed in. It's now going to be a nice flat sheet. Now after that paper dries, it will look like this. So what's great about this craft sheet, I'm going to take my little towel that I have here, all the ink and all the water wipes away. And you can use any type of ink on this craft sheet. All right, so now we're going to create the title for our page. And I just wanted to use a 2-inch strip of paper and stamp some lettering on it for my page title. And I'm actually using another type of ink by Ranger, and it's housed in this awesome little pad called the Scrapbooker's Palette. This is the basic set of colors, and what's great about this pad is that it has 4 colors right inside. And it also has a foam bottom, so when I'm working with it on my work surface, it doesn't slide around while I'm inking my pads. They also come in 2 other colors. They have the brights and they have the classics. These are some of my favorite colors to work with. And when I'm scrapbooking on the go and you know you're going to want to do some stamping, just throw those 3 pads in your gear and you've got everything you need to stamp in just about any color. Now you'll notice this is important. While I'm inking, because I'm working with a fabric type pad, it has a texture to it, a fabric texture right on the pad. So I'm moving the stamp around and tapping it at the same time, and that way I'm not going to transfer a fabric type texture onto my image. And then I'll just go ahead and stamp the letters. This is the SUM of the title that I will have will be Summer Wedding. And when I'm finished, there's my title. The property of this ink is really important because what I'm going to do is crinkle this up, spread the ink on there, spritz it with water, and iron it. If I were using a water-based ink that wasn't waterproof, it would smear and bleed all over the place. But because I use this awesome archival ink, look at how the ink stayed intact completely, and I gave this title page the whole treatment that I did on that other page element, and it came out perfect. What we're going to do now is create an embellishment for our page, and I'm going to use a manila tag, and these are just inexpensive from the office supply store. And then put on a new stamp here. This happens to be a little daisy. Now I'm going to show you a neat technique with a different type of dye-based ink. These are the Adirondack pads from Ranger. They come in 24 colors, and I know all the colors by heart because I've been using them for about 10 years now. I just love these colors. I'm going to make the top of my flower purple. Now one of the features of these pads is that you can remove the lid. So let me just show you how you're going to do that. Just give it a little twist and the lid comes right off. Now when you're stamping, it is nice to not have the lid in the way because I can just take my stamp and tap. Notice I'm doing the same tapping, moving technique that I showed you a little earlier, except this time I can just take the pad right onto the stamp. Here I have this meadow color. I'll open that up, twist the lid, and I'm going to ink my stem a different color. Now you can let that sit as long as you want because what we are going to do is create a watercolor effect. I'm going to hold the stamp in the palm of my hand and bring my spritzer. I'm just going to come over here. I'm going to spritz this about 5 or 6 times. And I also have at the ready my Craft It heat tool. And I'm going to stamp this onto the tag. Now when I'm pushing down, just firm, even pressure. You don't need to do what we call CPR stamping and push and rock that stamp. Just put it down. And then I'm going to come in with my heat tool and dry that ink as quickly as I can, because then it will keep it from bleeding out further than we want it. Now I still have some ink on this stamp that I haven't used up yet, so I'm just going to do that whole process again. Give it the spritz. Notice that this time the color is a little bit lighter. This is the third tag. We're going to do the same exact thing. Notice I haven't even made a single trip back to my ink pad. There is going to be a very soft, beautiful color. Let's bring our Scrapbooker's Palettes ink back into the scene here. I'm going to use one of my favorite pads of colors. This is the Classic, and I'm going to reach for the purple. I'm going to just ink the stamp, and again, it doesn't matter that the pad is smaller than my image. I just turn it around until it's all inked the way I want it to. I'm going to use this third tag. These other 2 tags, I'm going to make greeting cards out of those. This one is going to be the embellishment on my page. Firm downward pressure, lift. Gorgeous. I have this background of the brushless watercolor, and I have the foreground of those crisp archival inks right in the front. One last thing we're going to do to make this even more beautiful is bring in the butterscotch. Now in this case, I'm just going to take a water brush and use this as a palette of color. Bring in some ink on the tip of my brush and just tap off that little daisy. One of the favorite inks that I use is my archival black. You know, if I just had to pick one ink, that would be the one I would take with me wherever I went. And I want to put a little caption down on the bottom of my tag. All right, I'm going to stamp my little caption, Sprinkle Joy. I have this sweet picture of this little bridesmaid girl, little flower girl from a wedding. And I'm going to actually use my Distress ink again. We're going to do a little bit of photo tinting with the Distress ink. I'm also going to be using the cut and dry brush tips from Ranger. These are actually pen nibs without a housing. And you can just take them, use them several times, and then dispose of them when you're done. They're inexpensive. And I'm taking the lid off my Tattered Rose Distress ink. I'm just going to take the nib, dip it in the ink, and I'm actually just going to add a little pink. Now she has what used to be just a plain white ribbon on the bottom of her dress is now Tattered Rose pink. And if you'll notice how great this ink is just going right onto the photos. You couldn't do this with any other type of ink pad, but it works perfectly with these Distress inks. And there are tons of colors that you can use, so you have the full rainbow of colors available to you with these Distress inks. So now that we've made all of our embellishments and our title and we've altered our photos a little bit, let's take a look at that finished page. Starting with the title, remember how we did this? We used the archival ink first. It needed to be waterproof. Then we crinkled it, inked it, spritzed it, ironed it. And then here is that foreground, background brushless watercolor with archival ink out front. And then coming around here, we've got our little dress again with our Distress ink, bringing that into the foreground. And then finally, you'll notice I had to trim the Sprinkle Joy off the bottom of my tag because it just didn't fit on the bottom. So there's my little caption. And a little tip here, I used that same eggplant colored ink around the perimeter of the tag. I just rubbed it directly over the ink pad and then brush it with my water brush to create a little paperless frame around there. Now remember how all of this started with this little crinkled background that we distressed and ironed and everything. And you might say, well, crinkling is great, but what else can I do with it? I have some other neat ideas I can't wait to show you. Here is a picture of my daughter Emily skiing down a hill here. What I want to show you that I think turned out so cool is the way I made this background, again with those Distress inks. Now instead of crinkling it, I just simply folded it on a straight line, sort of like a fan, but it mimics the foreground picture here of the ski hill. All right, now this last page I want to show you, it brings us all home. We just did the entire background with our Distress ink. We used the Distress ink also to tint the photos. And then we have our brushless watercolor technique over here in the corner, and our archival inks are used as well. I mean, tons of stuff that you can do with inks. And then finally, I have this little card that I made with that leftover tag that I made earlier, so there are just tons of things you can do, especially when using that brushless watercolor technique. A little tip for you, when you store your ink pads, they have the dye in the felt, so if you store them upside down, the ink will stay at the top of the pad, and that's where you want it to live. So that when you're ready to ink something, then you just turn the pad over, ink your stamp, and the ink will be right there. I hope you had fun learning about inks today and that you'll give it a try on your own.
For step-by-step instructions on how to create this week's project, download the design guide featuring special make-it-your-own bonus tips.